Amber's not here.
Can we have a roll call, James?
Yes. I'll start with CAPA, and Matt will take HPC. Chair Golden.
Here.
Commissioner Addison.
Here.
Commissioner Hirsch.
Here.
Okay. Commissioner Merck.
Here.
And Commissioner Tosher.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Matt.
Chairman McCready. Here. Commissioner Connery.
Here.
Commissioner James.
Here.
Commissioner Akins.
Here.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
And I'm missing someone.
You're missing me.
Commissioner Quinn.
Thank you, Commissioner Quinn.
Here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Would we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And would you lead us in the pledge, please, Ms. Hirsch?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't see a separate item on the agenda for public comment, but I know we have public comment. Is that, you guys are behind me. All right, so we'll take any public comment at this time. I don't believe we have cards, so just whoever wants to get up first, just go ahead and get up and introduce yourselves. Sure. Your name and your address, please, for the record.
Thank you, Committee Chair Golden, CAPA Chair Golden, I should say. I'm Mark Lewis. I am the current board president at the Ojai Valley Museum, and we very much appreciate your meeting jointly to consider our gates proposal. It's been a long time incubating. You'll hear, I think, some comments briefly from Tony Thatcher and Claire Hill. And our executive director, Wendy Barker, is unable to be here today. So we're here to represent the museum, but the main presentation will be by the artist who has created the gates, the design, which of course is Doug Lochner. I just wanted to point out that there's a couple things on the packet just to clarify. There's some holdover language from when our original proposal, which referred to, we were combining the gates proposal with a redesign of the front plaza. We were going to put some new trees in, some new shrubs. We have scrubbed the shrubs for the time being. No shrubs, no trees. Just all we're asking today is the approval for the design of the gates.
Okay.
And also there's a proposed reference in there to a proposed revised budget that is informational. The board has not formally taken up anything along those lines. As far as the museum is concerned, in a formal sense, we are here purely to seek approval for the design. And with that, I think Mr. Thatcher.
Tony Thatcher. I live at 15275 Maricopa Highway in Ojai. I'm not a resident of the city. I'm here representing the museum as the past president. And I have not read this report because I didn't see it in time. But having known the past history of trying to get a gate put in here, I am concerned that we move the process along. It's been 2.5 years since we decided that we needed a gate, and that was at the insistence of our insurance company. Fortunately, the insurance company has not come back and checked up on us, but it concerns me that I promised them we would have a gate post haste, and that was in 2015. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Is there anyone else that would like to make a public comment? Well, and I'm going to begin by just saying that we are on a pretty tight time frame tonight because we have the Complete Historic Preservation Committee to make their presentation. We also have the committee to approve public art to hear the presentation as well and ask questions. So we want to move it along, and we're going to begin with asking Mr. Lochner to give a brief and yet thorough overview of his project. So as you know, as you can clip it along, Doug, without leaving anything out, we'll all be amazed and grateful.
Okay. Well, I mean, hopefully you have perused the report that I submitted. Has everybody done that? Mm-hmm. If you've done that, then you know everything. So I shouldn't really have to explain much. But essentially, we're back in front of the Historic Preservation Committee and in front of CAPA now to get the second revised design of this gate approved. It's hand-forged metal, in an appropriate style to the building. There's been an enormous amount of research. I think it's reflected in the report that went into this, and a lot of legwork, both from a historical perspective and also things like the mechanics of being able to put it in and not affect the walls and fulfill all the requirements relative to the historic nature of the building and the adobe walls and et cetera, et cetera. So I think instead of me going on, it'd be better if I just answered questions.
Are you comfortable with that as well, Darwin? That we just
Yes,
go-
that's
go
fine.
on? Okay, then we're going to go on with questioning first from the Committee to Approve Public Art. And I want to clarify this committee's role. This committee does not actually approve public art. It's a misnomer. We actually recommend to the Arts Commission after we have fully vetted a project. So I just want to make that really clear to everybody that tonight we're going to be making a recommendation that will then go on to the Arts Commission. I'm glad that it was clarified that the project does not include tree planting, and I think there was also reference to sign painting, repainting the sign, and I'm assuming that is also not part, okay, and I'm getting a shaking head over there. No, it's not. Another area that I feel needs some clarification is there were photos in the packet of a brick that was in disrepair. Is that part of the project, brick repair?
The arch repair should be accomplished prior to the gate being installed to allow for better access. But I don't think that would have anything to do with CAPA, obviously.
Okay, so that also is, and I just want to clarify for that. And my last question, general, before I turn it over to my fellow CAPA members, is it was also unclear as to whether or not the museum has seen the second gate proposal, and if so, have they approved the second gate proposal?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Okay, thank you. That's very,
The report stated that the museum, that the second proposal in the timeline was presented to the museum
Right.
board, who did approve it.
right, but there was some difference of opinion, so I'm glad to get that clarified. Thanks. Just so, again, those of who are new to this process know that the Committee to Approve Public Art has a set of criteria that we use when we're evaluating a project for recommendation to the Arts Commission that includes quality, visual form, style, appropriateness to the environment, permanence, and in this case, it's really critical, the permanence, because it includes structural integrity, protection against theft, vandalism, weathering, repair, and maintenance costs. We consider all these things before we send it on. And also elements of design, which some of you may think of as placemaking. How does this design fit in where it is intended and achieve its purpose as such? So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to...
Chair Golden?
Let's go in order.
Chair Golden?
Yes.
Can I ask a question, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Since I'm guessing many people, myself included, and I've been attempting to educate myself, I'm not sure who your CAPA members are and what roles they carry into the CAPA. If perhaps you could introduce the people on the other
Absolutely.
side for us and for our audience, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. What a great idea. All right, so to my left, we have Michael Addison. Michael is on the Public Art Committee. He also happens to be the chair of the Arts Commission. And sitting to his left is Barbara Hirsch, and Barbara Hirsch is our public art expert at large. And then Marcy Toscher, who is on the Public Art Committee and a member of the Arts Commission. So you see that there are three members of the Arts Commission, myself, Michael, and Marcy. And then we have a Planning Commissioner member as part of the Committee to Approve Public Art, and that's John Merck. Okay,
Who
thank
also
you.
happens to be the chair of the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Okay, we can start with anybody, or we can go in order. Any questions that you have or comments for Doug or for us, for each other?
Well, I have no questions, but I just want to say that I very much approve of the design in that it incorporates natural forms that relate to the waving grass or the reeds or whatever there might be that reflect on the importance of the natural surround in Ojai. And so I think in that sense it's a fine accomplishment.
some of the details
Okay.
on the gates. I think they're beautiful and they're more appropriate for the building. And it looks like this is almost kind of a pre-hung situation.
It is pre-hung.
Right. Will you be measuring before you fabricate this? Will you wait until the brick repair has occurred so you could get a more accurate measurement for the arch?
Yeah, so in the report, there was a process section that outlined the way that we do this. And speaking to that, the pre-hung part, basically I come out and build a template. So if you look at page 3 of my report, you'll note that on that brick wall, it's not straight. There's a bottom
Right.
step. It
Right.
goes in and then goes up and then
Right.
comes back out 2 inches.
Right.
So that's going to confine that archway.
Okay.
So really, in the sense of what we're doing, because the damaged brick is on the outside, it doesn't so much affect it. I can't
Right.
go beyond that width
Okay.
anyway. But just from a practicality standpoint, it would make sense for Public Works to fix that before we went in and.
Because they might uncover other problems, something else might
absolutely.
crumble, and you might
No,
wind
we
up.
want to get it stable
Right.
before we go in.
Okay,
for
good.
sure.
And then I'm assuming these gates, I apologize, I just got this
No
package.
problem.
The gates swing in towards the building?
As designed currently, they will swing either way, although in seems the appropriate way.
And I see where there probably are keyholes for a lock.
It's drawn with
here.
to accommodate a mechanism to have a lock. That at present actually was expressly asked not to have, eliminated from the design, although the way it's drawn, I can add that.
Okay, and then there won't be a handle, you'll just hold one of the rungs of the gate, push it open or push it,
If there's.
close it.
Again, if there's lock mechanisms there, it could be keyed or there could be a
A
handle
thumb
with
latch
a
or
key,
something,
you
or-
know.
Okay.
At this point, they said they didn't want a lock, so it's designed for 2 kingpins into the ground.
Okay,
On the inside, to get around having to have an access box for the fire department.
okay,
That, it's something that I think isn't material to the design of the gate. It's a tiny, trivial
Yeah.
aspect, and that's something that I view would be worked out with planning
Okay.
and the fire department.
okay, and then, let's say if the museum wants to leave the gates open, will there be a way they can keep them in
The
the?
same kingpins will be anchored in the open position so that
Okay.
they go into the ground,
Okay.
so the wind doesn't blow it around.
And then the little detail at the bottom, the little
Rivets.
rivets, yeah, are those kind of hand-hammered looking?
They
a
are,
little rustic looking?
everything's handmade.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no cast anything on that gate. So
But it looks
those are essentially to mirror the clovas that are in the
Right, the
front
door,
door.
right. And I don't, the finish that you're using?
I'm recommending that we go with a powder coat because it's the most durable, but in either case, whether we go powder coat or paint, it'll be essentially a bronze with a hand-applied patina, so it'll look like H bronze.
Yeah, good, yeah, I think they're great, yeah.
There was a color chip here from the previous gate, but I have another one if needed.
Thank you, they're beautiful.
I just wanted to comment also on how beautiful I thought the design was.
Thank you.
And how far we've come in the last 9 or 10 years in placemaking and public art.
How far we've come or I've come?
With us in the city and public art.
Thank you.
I wanted to congratulate Mr. Loeffner. I'm really impressed with this design. I was here when you made the original presentation of the HPC, and I went away going, oh, geez, I hope I don't, And I looked at this, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. You've incorporated all the things we talked about in that meeting, and is really suitable for the museum, and I think it's going to be a tremendous enhancement. Plus, as an engineer, I really like the way you have the whole thing. So you're going to build it separately in your shop and then just bring it out and drop it in, and it'll be all entirely there by itself,
Yes,
not dependent on anything. That's
the only way to do it right.
Yeah, the discussion at the HPC originally was that the wall can't provide any structural support there. So I was, yeah. So
Yeah, well, thank you.
I was really impressed with the whole solution. Thank you.
I try to pay attention, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions from, okay, then I'm going to go at this point with questions that I have. And I will also want to first state that the care you took in mimicking the archways, and the feature that I particularly like are the hand-forged iron nail heads that are on that bottom panel. I think it just gives such a foundation to this piece and a feeling of strength to it. So because it's rather lacy coming up from there, so this nice, almost like a above-ground footing.
Right.
Was very appealing to me, so I applaud that. And I also appreciate your thorough drawings of the footings regarding the installation. And if I understand correctly, you are not going to be touching the sides of the brick at all.
Right.
That this is footed completely underground and with an arch that comes up, and then the gate is actually going to be attached to that arch that is footed. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And I have a little advantage because I did hear you talking about that with Public Works one day, so otherwise I'd probably be asking you a lot more questions about it. But I appreciate these drawings. Now, I have a question for you. On page 5 of 48, there's a reference that says that the gates need not be high security. And could you talk a little bit about that? What was your understanding of that? And is that something that the museum and city council are comfortable with? That there's an understanding the wall can be scaled, and so therefore the gates need not be high security? Just so I can understand the thinking, unpack the thinking on that just a little.
The original criteria I was given, that was part of it. So, and again, that has to do with the requirements for fire access from the fire department. So because the wall is 4 feet tall, it doesn't matter how strong the gates are, somebody can just go over the wall. I mean, you can climb over it with very little effort. So the feeling was, instead of having the extra expense and burden to have a code acceptable key, safe for the fire department and all that, they just blow that off because it doesn't really matter. If somebody can climb over the wall, what's the point of locking the gates? Again, that's something that I think isn't material to this discussion. It's not going to affect the design one way or another. I mean, it's not going to look any visually different if it locks or doesn't lock. I think that's something that needs to be refined through planning and interfacing with the fire department.
Okay. And then for the same reason, and Marcy was asking some similar questions, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. In the evening, when the museum is closed, these drop, what do they have a name?
Pins.
Pins that drop in, they can be pulled up by anyone and opened or not. They could be, okay.
Well, yeah, that's the whole idea.
So that I just want to understand for myself, okay. You brought along a pole. One of my questions was, what is that, do you have a sample of the texture on the poles? And you do, you brought one along. And I'm very interested in if maybe
Sure.
a smaller one can be passed along.
Well, I can pass them both out. So these aren't indicative of what any one component of that gate. However, these are hand forged from steel. So they give you a sense of the texture that you get and the structural of the material. So, I mean, this looks real frail and, weak, but I mean, you can't bend it. I would encourage you to try. So I brought those to just give an indication of the strength of the components and the relative texture.
Whoa, it's heavy. Wow.
It is heavy.
And it's quite beautiful, too, so I'm really glad that you brought that along. Is this similar to what you did at El Bello Plaza?
Right.
The weight and the texture of this? I don't know if everyone is familiar that Doug Lochner also did the, it's in your packet, a picture of it, the iron leaves that are around the arches at La Bella Plaza?
La Bella Plaza, yeah. So
Done by Doug
the,
Lochner.
that is a really good example because, one, it shows forged ironwork and hand forging and
Yes.
texturing. It also was done using the same template process that I'm proposing for this.
Okay.
And that archway, although it looks perfect, isn't. It's not, you know, if you took a CAD program and drew a perfect arch and stuck it in there, there'd be gaps. So to accommodate that, we do a template and then actually bend and roll the metal to that template, which is a lot more work than just putting it in a machine and saying, give me this, you know, give me a 12-foot radius, and you get a perfect 12-foot radius. Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Well, what you're really saying is that these are custom made for,
Well, yeah,
for that opening, which is incredible, really incredible.
It's an extraordinary amount of work, to be quite honest. I mean, it's not, to do it properly so that the sight line is consistent across that brick is a lot of work. It's way more work than just rolling. Normally, they have a thing called a roll that you stick metal through and it'll make it into an arch. But, you know, in this case, we can't necessarily use
Is
that.
the sample that you're passing around, or was passed around, is that the powder coat finish on that?
No, that's no finish.
That's no finish on that.
Right.
If we wanted to, Vanna is showing off the
I did a powder coat, I did a color board for the first presentation,
okay.
which is here somewhere. I don't have it. And unfortunately, it has the exact powder coat and hand finish.
Okay, I think someone's running to see if they can find
I
that, because it'd be
have
good for us to
a
see that.
close one, because I did 5 different samples, but the one that I selected, you have here.
Uh-huh.
So far.
Doug, when you say you're recommending a powder coat, is this not your decision to make? Because when we take this forward, we want to be able to say that what kind of coat it's going to have.
The powder coat's a budget decision. It adds $2,000 to the job. It's not anything I have control over as far as what it cost. So it's a more durable finish. The biggest advantage of powder coat is, unlike paint, if done properly, there's no voids. So the things that ruin a coating essentially are 2 things. One is UV, so the ultraviolet from the sun essentially just wears the coating out, and the coating fails due to the coating failure itself. The second thing is, if you have any voids in the coating, you get moisture and stuff behind that, and the metal behind it rusts, and then it sort of peels off. So in the case of powder coating, they take the metal, it's hung on a thing, and an electrostatic charge is applied to the metal, and then they have a gun that just puts out a mist of dry powder that is attracted to that by an electrostatic charge. Mm-hmm. That allows it to do 2 things. One, every single tiny little crevice gets coated. And the second thing, there's a uniform thickness because the electrostatic charge dissipates as the powder hits it. Wow. So you get a perfectly uniform coating with no voids, and then it's stuck in an oven and melted. So just as a ceramic glaze, it glazes and it flows in any little tiny pinholes or cracks or anything else. So the process that I'm suggesting is very involved. It's from a company down in Ventura that does a lot of offshore work and, you know, works on architectural metals and whatnot. I've used them in the past. They're the ones who were responsible for Libby Park, for that powder coat. They do a really good job. Essentially, they do a single primer layer. It gets baked, you know, melted, cured. They sand that. They inspect it for any tiny little voids or anything, putty all those with a special putty, do another primer coat, do another inspection. I'm sorry, prior to all that, they sandblast the thing to put a tooth on it.
And just to go back to what you said, because I want to make sure I'm understanding, that you did not consider this finish to be part of the $20,000 allocation for the project. You consider that to do this finish, you are asking for an additional $2,000 above and beyond the $20,000 of the project
So
allocation?
the initial budget was based on a far simpler gate design that had nowhere near the complexity of this particular design. And it also, it didn't have the preformed arch to hang the gates from. I mean, there's a lot of things different. This particular project has grown in scope, okay? So the original budget number that I gave the museum didn't incorporate 100 hours of me putting together all this stuff to come back and forth with the city, first off, right? Because I was told, make some gates. There was no discussion that we would have to get it cleared and blessed and everything else. And it was a far simpler design. So if you take all those things and add them up, you see the numbers, it's grown, right? So powder coat is one of the things that is an optional, you can pass that, thank you.
So this coming around now is the coat that you're
The
recommending?
original one.
The color, okay. But just
so
because
the
of
powder
time, I
coat-
just want to skip to almost a yes/no on this, if you'll forgive me.
Well, the
So
powder
the
coat's
answer is that
optional.
that's not included at this point. You still have to get agreement to have this additional money for the powder coat?
The budget for this new gate has not been finalized
Okay.
because, the design hasn't been finalized. So there's no point in finalizing a budget when the design's still moving. What we need, I think the purpose of this meeting today was to approve the design. Once we get the design approved, then
Well,
we can nail
actually,
everything down.
CAPA also approves the maintenance plan, the finish. All of this is part of what CAPA does. What CAPA does is extremely thorough, and we are only comfortable going back to the Arts Commission with a recommendation because all of the dots have been, all the i's have been dotted and the t's have been crossed. So that when we make that recommendation, we're saying, we know how it's going to be maintained. We know what the finish is going to look like. We know all these pieces. So this is why I'm asking you these questions, that that this finish that you've described to us, which protects it, is not part of the $20,000 allocation from the city. Correct?
In the budget that's outlined in this report, it's an optional item.
Okay. So we do far more than just the design. We don't just look at
paint
design.
coating
It's
should be-
one of the criteria we look at.
The paint coating that is within the budget that I've allocated there should be good for 10 years, by the way. If you go look at the archways at El Bella Plaza, they've been there 10 years, and it's just now starting to fail in the lower corner of that.
Okay.
So
I have some questions about the side gate, and I would, for everyone, refer to page 8 of 48.
I had one question about the front gate.
Oh, sure, go right ahead. No, go ahead. If it's,
I think, Doug, from what you said, it sounds like the gate has the same finish all over, but this rendering, it looks like the flowers are lighter. Is that just the rendering?
the flowers are a different metal.
So they're going to have a different color?
They don't have any,
Look.
they don't have any coating.
Oh, so they're going to be a different color?
So they're either stainless steel or brass.
A really different color, like gold or
Well,
silver?
the
Brass
brass
is
would
gold, stainless.
patina to a green. The stainless would be, a mild gray.
they'll weather. Right, right.
Okay, so
Okay.
they won't have a finish.
They could,
Yeah.
but
No,
I
I
think it'd
just
look,
couldn't tell
I
from the
think it'd look
rendering.
weird.
Good
if
eye.
And I
they-
didn't see anything in the notes
Question.
about the finish, so I
Yeah,
just
good
was
eye.
curious.
Okay.
Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you, Cindy. That was great. To go back to the side gate, it sounds as though this is a change from your original design, which was a threefold gate and was going to open only on one side, because later on in the document, it still refers to that gate. But here on page 8, it talks about a four-fold gate, which to me reminds me of like a louvered closet door. It would open that way and fold. Now, what I'm not seeing and what I would like to see is what, because it's open most all the time, is what that looks like when the one side of that is up against the other. That is a design element that we don't know what it looks like, and that I would ask, is there any way for you, you did this very clever way of showing how it would look photographically, is there also a way for you to do that?
Not with additional work. It's going to look like a single panel. 'Cause the
So
panels
it'll
stack.
match up? The way,
They
when they stack, it won't be that one is.
No,
they'll
they
actually-
stack.
That's good to know,
In
okay.
exact alignment.
Okay,
So
all right,
it's
great.
just-
That
It
answers
just
my
becomes
question.
the same thing twice as thick,
Okay.
basically.
My other question about that is that it looks to me, and this is figure 9 on page 35 of 48, when I look at that picture, it looks like there's a railing that is bending around onto the post that's on the, I believe that would be the north side. And when I'm reading how you're talking about installing the side gate, if I understand it correctly, there will be posts put on next to these pillars. Now, will they have to be beyond that side gate? They're not going to be, in other words, the gate, how does the gate line up with those posts? It's on the front side, on the sidewalk side?
I measured that wall, so I can essentially center the gate, or close to center the gate on that wall, on those pillars. And by having the 4-panel design, when it folds open, it doesn't impact anything.
Including that railing?
That one little railing comes down and then does a little L. That L
yeah.
doesn't need to be there. There's no step there. There's no code requirement for it to be there. So in the installation of the gate, we would hack that off and put the tongue down the way it should be, so that L goes away. And the railing, it doesn't affect the functioning of that railing at all. It still meets all the codes.
All right, and I'll leave it to HPC as to whether or not removal and modification of that fence is problematic, because we don't get into that, but that's good to know that that's the plan, is to modify that side rail gate,
Side rail,
side rail.
handrail.
Thank you.
Which is not historic.
And then because that wall is so thick and then they fold back, they're gonna fold back, but it'll be, I don't know the right words to use, like a closet door.
They fold tight against the
Yeah,
pillar.
okay, just so I get a picture in my
And
head
they're
of
also
this.
designed so that if they
All right.
wanted to, they could have just the 2 inner panels
Yeah.
open, which would fold back onto themselves.
Okay. Now, your explanation of how the front gates are being secured is so fantastic. I could really understand that. But there is no information on the installation of the side gates. So that's another piece that, for me, from CAPA, is missing from this report. Is those, and I'm assuming it's similar. It's going to be footed down below, the
Right,
same.
exactly.
Is this something that we can add to our paperwork on this without too much trouble from you? If it's the similar, just to note, have you note that it's a similar installation procedure?
You sure?
So
should be
those
in
gates
that.
are also being supported by the footing underground?
In this drawing. Yeah, it's got 2 posts that go into the ground. That hold it up. So because it doesn't have anywhere near the weight of the front gate, we have the same structural requirements.
Okay.
It's so short, it's only this tall.
Okay. Well, that concludes the questions that I had for you, and then I would turn it back over for follow-up questions from Barbara and then Marcy.
If the gates are not powder coated,
Right.
if they're left raw,
Well, they wouldn't be left raw.
they wouldn't.
No.
Well, what would the alternative be? Would they be waxed? Would they be?
They'd be painted,
They'd be painted?
which is listed in the report.
And what would the maintenance be on that? Would it be every year?
Ideally, with anything in the public space, somebody competent should look at it at least once a year to find out if there's anything that needs to be addressed. It's regardless of the finish. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's, bronze or something with a finish, or stainless steel where there is no finish. It needs to be looked at. It's in a public space. People do, things to it. Who knows? So as a minimum maintenance, it should be inspected once a year, whether it's powder coat or paint. If there is a failure in the finish, it should be addressed at that time, touched up, essentially, a little spray can. Given that, the finish should be pretty good. I went and looked at the Albella gates, or arches rather, yesterday, and they've held up really well. They're 10 years old. They're just now starting to show a little bit of rust at the bottom, which could be resolved with a wire brush and some primer and some paint. So
Okay, because I'm watching the clock here and want to make sure that HPC has its full due, and 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Part of what we ask is CAPA, and I know this has not gone through the usual process, so you and I didn't have an opportunity to go back and forth on what you needed to include here today, other than last minute. But a maintenance plan is a key piece of what we want to see when we take this recommendation forward. So I'm hoping that the minutes of this meeting, where Doug has just described the maintenance plan, will be recorded and can be attached to the Arts Commission's meeting agenda, so that it's part of the document if this goes forward to a recommendation from the Arts Commission. I would not feel right doing that without having some idea of what the maintenance plan is. It's a very key piece of what we do, is making sure that there's a doable maintenance plan. We also usually ask you to talk about things like what would happen if it was vandalized. You have addressed weathering, but repair, things like that. So any additional information that you can supply before the Arts Commission meeting would be really, really approved. It's a little out of order from what we normally do, but we're bending, everybody's bending here.
If the design gets approved, then I can provide a maintenance plan.
Okay.
I mean, the maintenance plan's dependent on the design.
Right, but now we're doing the approval, and we need to have that. Okay.
And, Christine,
Marcy has a quick one.
Christine, do you mind 1 second? I'm back here, so it's hard to interject.
Very hard.
We can make sure to include the information just given to you in the Art Commission's minutes. So we'll do that, and then at a later point when Mr. Lochner provides the full maintenance plan, we'll make sure everybody sees that.
Thank you. That'll be excellent. We can work with that. Marcy, you have a couple questions quickly, I hope.
From the picture, it looks like, is there a slight grade? I'm talking about the side gates.
There's nothing level.
It's not.
Nothing is level or plumb.
Okay, but is there a noticeable grade so that you would?
The gate, that's why we template it, so that visually it looks level even though it isn't.
So you won't follow the grade, you will keep it?
No, we will follow the grade.
You're going to follow the grade?
So the gates are actually a trapezoid, they're not really a rectangle.
Right, okay. Second question. Before you proceed with the finishing of the gates, can we see a strike-off of what the finish will look like before?
I just gave you one.
But I mean the actual one that you're going to use. You could mix paint things or come out differently and all of that. Just a strike-off before you proceed.
We will provide a chip. I mean, we did that.
Yeah, like something like that.
I think
what you're actually going to use.
We have the chip.
Well, I mean, that you have the chip.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you don't like that, we can talk about other things, but I mean.
Okay, and then my last question real quick. If it's painted and not gone through the powder coating process, will you be able to achieve the same kind of patina and variation in the coloring? So it looks aged?
There's no difference in the appearance. It's really just the materials.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now, thank you, Doug, very much.
And that, actually, the finish, if you want to look at the finish, just go look at Albella, because it's
be the same as
basically
Albella.
the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience over here, HPC. I know you have a meeting following this, so I'm hoping that you can, dovetail a little bit. That's permitted. The next step then is for CAPA to either recommend or not recommend that these gates go forward to the Arts Commission. We're making that recommendation to them. So John, would you like, we'll start at your end and move forward
Can
this
I
way?
say one thing just
Sure,
before we close out your
absolutely.
thing relative to finish and stuff? I do this for a living. I do public art for a living. I don't make gates for a living. And all of my work is archival, all of it. I mean, I'm fully aware of what is required for objects to survive in the public space. So it's not, I understand your concern, but I mean, it's, I'm a professional and am an expert in archival finishes. So you can be assured it will stand the test of time.
Thank you, Doug. Okay. John?
So are we making a recommendation? or-
Well, any comments, or behind me over there, do we make a motion for this, or do we entertain a motion?
Thank you, Chair. It would be in order for CAPA to entertain a motion and make a recommendation if so desired to the Arts Commission. It would also be in order for the Historic Preservation Commission to make a motion and approve the work permit, also if in order. It does take two separate actions. One, the recommendation from CAPA to the Arts Commission, and second, the approval by the Historic Preservation Commission for the work permit.
Okay. My understanding is that before HPC makes their recommendation, they're going to have their conversation with each other and with Mr. Lochner, that we're making ours first, and then they're going to go.
Yeah, well, I'd be glad to
This
recommend.
is so hard
it.
to have you guys behind us over there.
Yeah,
It's like, I feel
apologies.
like
And
I
that-
need a swivel chair.
We did, meet with all the chairs, and that was how we laid it out. So CAPA can do your motion now, and then
Okay,
then
so-
HPC.
Would someone
Well,
like to make a motion?
I'd love to make a motion that we approve this
Okay, do we have a
as
second?
presented.
A second from Michael Addison. Any discussion? Barbara?
When we approve, do we approve the finish?
Barbara is asking, I don't know if your mic is on, Barbara. Barbara's asking if, when we approve, do we approve the finish? And what I've written down here on my notes after reading and then listening to you today is that I also would recommend that this design go forward, but I would ask that first, a maintenance plan be submitted to the Arts Commission so that we know that we're handing them off something that is complete. And I also wrote down that we need the side gate installations and that the finish needs to be specified. Because when we approve, we're not approving and then things will change. Because in order for them to change, you have to have a meeting with CAPA. In other words, anything that is changed from what we approve has to come back to this committee unless it's, I know there's like negligible things that can be done, but for example, you were involved in having to come back to CAPA to discuss the wall at the park and to discuss what we were going to do with the pennies eventually. So that's kind of just like alerting you to that any
Right.
changes that are made, and alerting the museum as well, any changes that are made that are considered substantial have to come back before the CAPA. We want to avoid that.
I would offer that whether it's paint or powder coat, relative to your decision, it shouldn't matter because the paint's going to have a lifespan of at least 10 years.
We want you to recommend and tell us.
And the powder coat may or may not have a lifespan extended that, depending on whether or not it gets abused. So, no matter what, there's going to be a maintenance component involved, and that's simply a matter of touching up any failure to the paint, whether it be powder coat or paint. To be quite honest, there's an argument that paint is actually a better medium than powder coat because it's easier to touch up. So relative to your recommendation, I would suggest that you do it, perhaps advising that the finish be selected that would be the most advantageous for maintenance, because
Yes.
that leaves it to a point where we can select the best product.
Complicating this is my question earlier about the budget. We have no authority, nor is there any understanding that this budget will be more than $20,000 from the city. So anything that we recommend would have to come within that budgetary stricture unless you have funding from another source.
Right,
That
so
you would
under
have to
that,
let us
under that
know.
budget for the front gate, it's spec'd as paint. And that paint's good for, based on the evidence in Ojai, good for at least 10 years. with no maintenance,
Okay,
none.
that's good to know.
So-
Now, probably we're a little off here by having you talk with our motion on the floor, but that's okay, I think. Anyone else have any discussion about this motion before we call for a vote? Barbara, did you want to say something? You look like you wanted. Yes. So can we revise the motion then, Mr. Merck, with your permission?
Actually, I'm looking forward to the powder coating myself. I just think it's a more durable finish.
But you do
So-
understand the artist has said that he won't do that without additional funds that have not been allocated.
I understand that, yeah.
Chair Golden, may I offer a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Thank you. My suggestion would be that the CAPA recommend approval of either finish, delegating to the museum and the city council the choice between the two finishes. It may be the case that the museum in their upcoming budget request for the next fiscal year could ask for the additional $2,000 to the council. I don't want to presume that the council will approve that, but if you approve tonight both finishes, then that would provide that flexibility should the council find the funds to do so. That's my suggestion.
Can someone do a so moved on what he said?
Said, I will add that to my motion.
All right, so we're so moving that modified motion. We have a second on the modified motion from Michael. All right, so are we all comfortable then with having a roll call for this vote? Okay. Who's doing that back there?
I will do that. Chair Golden,
Yes.
Commissioner Addison,
Yes.
Commissioner Tosher,
Yes.
Commissioner Hirsch,
No.
Commissioner Merck.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Okay, thank you. We're going to turn this meeting over now to the Historic Preservation Committee.
Thank you, Christine. I'll open it up to comments and questions from the fellow commissioners on HPC. Commissioner Convery?
Hi, Doug. I just was concerned about the two different metals on there. You know, it doesn't really, there's no description of that in the presentation. There was no real conversation about that, and the gate's going to have two different, ultimately finishes, an unfinished part and a finished part. And to me, you know, you referenced Gaudi and Dali and Picasso, and we had this conversation when you came before us that it wasn't, you know, it's really a classic mission revival, and I know there's an art statement being made, but to me it feels a little too far from what the building is and what the rest of Ojai is. You know, to have a stainless steel element or a bronze element in the middle of a powder-coated or painted, I'm not sure which gate, you know, but of that look. So I would just say that I would prefer to see it be all one finish and one type of metal.
Well, it could be, certainly be steel and be powder coated. It would, you know, but I mean, it's got a bronze plaque right next to it.
Yeah, and
which it's going to look like.
But the gate will look like the bronze plaque with the finish that was passed around the chip, but I'm
Right.
talking about those flower elements in the middle. If they're stainless steel
Stainless steel or bronze.
or bronze,
I thought
mean,
that-
either one, they're going to be a different color.
Yeah,
ultimately.
the nice thing about that is it does give some contrast to the gate.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the gate. I think the gate has a lot going on already, and I just didn't want it to get too far busy, essentially.
Right.
You know? And
I mean,
it
if
was
it's-
hard to tell from the rendering what was going on with those finishes, so that's,
They,
you know, it's just my thought.
in either case, it would be subtle. You know, they're not going to be loud.
Stainless steel can be loud.
Well, if it's, yeah,
You know,
it
I
would be
don't know.
distressed to look like aged pewter.
So it's not I mean, to me, stainless steel is stainless steel. Is it a powdered stainless steel or a pewter finish stainless?
Well, it's stainless,
Does it
if
have a
you
finish?
distress it,
So it's distressed?
absolutely, it's hammered, just like the sample I sent
Okay,
around.
because to me, stainless steel just sounds like stainless steel. I didn't know that it was going to be. Yeah.
No, it's not like it's not a refrigerator. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I could have brought some forged stainless steel.
Yeah.
It looks just like this when it's forged.
So the two things, you passed around a bar that was a little bit darker than that. So that's what you're talking about, stainless steel, and that's what you're talking about, powder coat, right there.
Well, the powder coat's darker if you
That,
look at.
what Tony has.
But that's not good.
So this
No,
is
but
iron,
look
so this
like
isn't
that,
stainless.
yeah.
So stainless distressed would buff out, it'd be a little bit more toward a gray.
Okay.
Why wouldn't they just be wrought iron?
The flowers could be wrought iron if you insisted on that.
No, I mean the whole gate.
And as I said, the flowers could be the same material if you insisted on that. In my vision, it seemed appropriate to make that element have a contrast to the body of the gate.
I'm just,
And I just want to say that CAPA approved it with the two different metals and the flowers like that, just so you're clear that we would have to revisit it if you asked for that
that's why this
change.
process is kind of confusing.
It is very confusing.
In our previous meeting, I think the gist of the comments were that we wanted to go in a more traditional mission revival direction, and I think we're moving in that direction. I'm surprised by the notion of two different metals. That's just a total surprise to me. Was that in before, in the previous submission?
The original gate was a single metal and a single profile.
My recommendation would be for a single metal. Are there any other comments? Or
I had a comment.
Commissioner James?
Just wondering if it's okay with the, it's on the National Register, right? The museum. Is it all right with the museum if the gate is a different style than the, different style of architecture than the building?
It's actually required.
It's required.
If you read the consultant's report and my report, both of them speak to the requirements put forth by the.
I read that, but I didn't see any
if-
other Art Nouveau.
If I make,
In a mission revival.
well, this isn't Art Nouveau now. If I make the gates exactly like a mission gate, it would basically invalidate your historic stature of that building. So per the specifications put forth by the federal government and California's rules on that, it needs to be noticeably different. What I've tried to do is give you something that mirrors the components of that building in an architectural style that's appropriate for the era, yet retains an artistic approach and an artistic voice that fulfills that obligation. And it also fulfills the museum's directions to me to give them something that differentiated that building from a church.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like, I can answer the question. We have approved, we've embraced the design as it is, and we like it, and we've approved it unanimously. Oh, I'm sorry. Museum Board Chairman Mark Lewis, just to answer Commissioner James' question, we do embrace the concept. We think it's terrific. We don't think it has to be exactly by every square inch, something exactly replicable to the mission era. We think this complements that very well, and we have approved it.
So the Arts Commission and the Museum Board are aware of the two metal finishes and that the flowers are stainless steel.
Stainless or bronze. Or bronze.
That will,
So the Arts
Weather.
Commission and the Museum Board are accepting a proposal that is as yet undefined in finishes, is what I'm hearing.
They were shown the renderings of both and said that they would be happy with either, yes.
So the flowers at the top might be hammered stainless, they might be hammered bronze, we don't know.
At this point, I haven't made that determination, although I'm willing to go with either one.
Are there any other comments or questions from Commissioner Quinn?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm very happy that you've come back with a design that represents the church so well. I also was concerned about the posts on the other gates, how that supported the gate. I like this support so much better.
Yeah.
And I love how that arch fits. I personally don't have a problem with the two metals because I believe you'll come up with what works for the design. So I'm happy.
Thank you.
Commissioner Akins?
So being the one person that's actually sat on 2 out of 3 of these, but abstained from voting in both the museum and again in the HBC vote last month when we met, that was because of the motion that was made. If I had have said no, it would have precluded Mr. Lochner from coming back to us, and so that's why I abstained there. So the designs have been, this design has been reviewed by the museum board. I think we had 3 people who were unable to be there, but we have a sizable board, so it was a sizable amount of people that reviewed it. We have been grateful to Doug and happy with him coming back with us with this design. It doesn't mirror the museum exactly, but it does have, if you look at the front door on the museum, you'll see that the River of Life is on that design. That design also is on Commissioner Quinn's Aliso Street adobes. Well, I'm just pointing out, and the story to why that happened is that when the St. Thomas Aquinas Church, I guess, was redone at some point, there were doors sitting around, aging nicely, and the person who built the Aliso Street adobe acquired those doors and moved them over to that adobe. So it is nice that the gates, although not exactly as required by the codes, do reflect some feature of the museum and some feature, in this case, also of the community, of another one of our city landmarks. So I am very happy with what we've seen, what's been presented.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes. I'm going to talk about something that hasn't been touched on at all. And I'm surprised that it hasn't. To me, the design work of the whole gate, and I recognize the Rivers of Life, recognize the archway, and all the attempts to reflect the artistic venture put forth by the original builders of the building. I love the bottom panels, the solid bottom panels with the, I don't know, you call them brads or nail heads or whatever that look that you have on the bottom. That's brilliant because that really does tie in with the mission style architecture. And that's one thing that we're not talking about too much today. We're talking more about art than we are talking about the appropriate architecture. And your gate hits it out of the park on that.
Thank you.
The appropriate architecture.
Your rendering's really poor. That's
a
little bit better, but
yeah, it's great. Thank you.
thank you.
If there are no other comments or questions, I will open it up for a motion.
I would like to go ahead and make a motion that the Historic Preservation Commission approve the gates as they are, that the coding as specified, options as specified by Mr. Lochner for the painting or the powder coat be left at the decision of, as stated, of the museum and the budgetary constraints of the City Council, and that we stay with the design that was approved of the two different metals and allow Mr. Lochner to make that decision.
I second that motion.
Do we have a roll call?
Commissioner Quinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Akins,
Yes.
Commissioner James,
Yes.
Commissioner Connery,
Yes.
Chairman McCready.
No.
Motion carries.
Thank you, everybody.
We're going to adjourn the joint meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission and the Committee to Approve Public Art, and thank you for all of you.
We're good, huh?
I knew what I was doing. No, I thought you guys might go over another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm sorry that we just, we got hung up on some of it.
5-1, because I'm missing it.
Interesting.